the US pharmaceutical company called Endo in the area of global continuous improvement. And I've worked very closely with Nuala, and Nuala's worked very closely with the company for the last number of years. And definitely just as maybe a very quick introduction for myself, for most of my operational excellence or continuous improvement career, along with everybody, I've always used lean tools, right? And we always train people on the tools, which are, of course, vitally important, right, as enablers for delivering the outcomes that we want. What I will say is from experience is when we start to talk about culture and behavior and really building a culture of continuous improvement within organizations, it can be a little bit more difficult sometimes for people to digest what that actually means, and equally in terms of actually trying to measure the impact it has or outcomes, right, that culture has in terms of operational performance. So definitely from working with Nuala, like, my mind has completely opened up and my mindset has definitely shifted. I don't mean any way away from lean tools, but actually how we can actually use culture as a key enabler and build that for business as well. So I'd like to first of all thank Nuala for joining and presenting for today. And I suppose as per normal with our webinars, it'll be possibly a 30 to 40 minute presentation with a Q&A and roundtable discussion at the end. And I know that the first question that's always asked is, will there be slides available? Yes, there will be slides available, okay? We'll make them available sometime next week as well. So Nuala, look, a huge thank you for taking the time today to join us and to present out. So I'll hand over to yourself now. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Paul, and thanks, Steve, for the invite. Always happy to facilitate, and I'm a great believer in knowledge sharing and knowledge transfer. And the only way we do this, I do a lot of work around knowledge management within the regulated sector as well. And recently I was asked, what's the best knowledge management system that we can use, to get knowledge to flow across our organizations and break down some of the silos. As I say, we regularly now send lots of our insights and knowledge to SharePoint to die because it never emerges again. And if you're not part of that SharePoint team or whatever, you don't get it. But yeah, I was recently asked for my suggestion on the best knowledge management tools to use, and I was like, your mouth, your voice, get in front of people, start having a dialogue. That is the best way to actually share knowledge. So delighted to be here today in terms of the Dublin Lean Network, and we'll see. I'm going to share my screen, so bear with me while we go through this process here, and hopefully this is going to work, and you're going to tell me you can see what I have here.
Perfect.
Lovely. Okay, perfect. And as we say, the slides are all available. Now, I can't see all your lovely faces once I'm in slideshow mode here. So please, either Paul or Steve, if there's things coming into the chat and you want to, or people are putting up their hands, just stop me and we can attend to that. So obviously, I'm working largely in the regulated sector, but what I'm talking about here today applies across all sectors. It's sector agnostic, but we do have some special features within a regulated environment, whether that's pharma, biotech, medtech, or even the health sector that we also work with. But ultimately today, what I want to talk to you about is engaging the front line to deliver on the bottom line. So it's, I guess, the work that we do is really about making sure that organizations are improving their performance and can sustain that improved performance without it kind of seeping back into the groundwater. My subtitle is When Good Enough is Not Enough. With a continuous improvement mindset, there's always room for improvement. So there's a little bit about myself. I won't go into the detail there, but you'll get it in your notes and you'll be able to contact me. But 100 years ago, I came out of engineering school and started working in the pharma sector. Went on to work in a lot of greenfield and brownfield startups, new product introductions, tech transfers, and now I work largely in this space around supporting organizations to get the best out of their organization and their talent. but also to reduce the impact on the business when we get things wrong. It's very costly business when we get things wrong in the pharma sector, as it is with anything. So it's really about that holistic view of how do we improve our performance outcomes. And I regularly say, what's good for the patient is good for the business. We have a very clear focus in terms of who we're working for, and it is that patient that receives the medicines. Now, interestingly enough, I also teach OpEx on the MBA for Life Sciences in TU Dublin, and through a number of master's programs on technical validation programs and stuff like that. And there's 100 different ways we can define operational excellence, or continuous improvement, as we tend to refer to it now within the regulated sector. So maybe this is something you can think about as we go through the session today, and you can reflect on it, and maybe come back and in the chat later reflect on that. So of course, over the years, I've used 100 different versions of what we think operational excellence is, used quotes from various sources. But the one that most recently has really resonated for me is this one from Joseph Parrish. And I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with his book. I love this book. He calls it The State of Readiness. And it talks about OpEx becoming a precursor for a high-performing organization. But there's a number of reasons why I particularly like this definition. And he defines it as, OpEx is a state of readiness. And just, that concept of being ready, flexible and capable of, shifting on a dime if that's what we need to do. But this state of readiness attained as the efforts throughout the organization. So no silo-based breakdowns or fragmentation there. So when the enterprise reaches a state of alignment in pursuing its strategies and goals, and where the corporate culture is committed to the continuous and deliberate improvement of company performance. Now, that's the key part for me, where the culture is committed to the continuous and deliberate improvement of company performance, and more importantly, and the circumstances of those people working there. So it brings the culture in, it brings the people who have the most impact on the outcomes for the business, and in our case, the outcomes for the patient. And it is around making sure that we are pursuing our strategies, that we're not just having little pockets of improvement that are not aligned with the overall mission for the business at the moment. And he says that this is a precursor for becoming a high performance organization. And you might realize there's no mention of the tools anywhere, as Paul said. But of course, the tools are the means by which we get a lot of this improvement done. I'm not downing on the tools, but we have to set them within the context of the continuous and deliberate improvement of that performance. And, from my experience, high-performing companies think about culture differently. And they know that this, winning culture isn't just about making people feel good or yoga at lunchtime and foosball in the canteen or whatever that is. It's unashamedly about demonstrating a sustained and robust capability of delivering on results, and being therefore, next in the line considered for the next new product introduction or the next new expansion or the next project that's coming down through the global network. And goodness knows, we've seen enough in the papers recently about the complete turmoil now happening in the global markets, and particularly for those of us availing of the tax scam here in Ireland, as Trump calls it, in the pharmaceutical or biopharmaceutical sector. But particularly in our industry, but I think this, as I say, is agnostic. Culture in the organization determines the performance outcomes, because particularly for us, it affects our ability to identify and act on near misses. And many of those near misses lead to drug shortages. And I'm sure any of you online today who either take a medicine or have a family member who takes a medicine will know that this global drug shortages problem, you can't go in to get over-the-counter medicines these days without your pharmacist swapping them out. So it's a major, major impact. And we know from research that over 60% of drug shortages are as a result of quality failures within the manufacturing phase of the life cycle. And of course, we want to ensure that we have this transparent problem escalation and issue identification early, and then, you know, having that mindset for striving for operational excellence. Now, I like this one. When I define what do I mean by patient-focused excellence, this comes from one of the quality gurus of old, Philip Crosby. He wrote certainly the book Quality is Free, and his term is quality is free. We know that quality departments don't run on air, but he mentions that quality is a result of a carefully constructed cultural environment, and it has to be the fabric of the organization, not just part of the fabric. So it doesn't belong to the quality unit or anything else. The quality of the product is a critical quality attribute of that product, and it's owned by everybody who has a finger in the pie anywhere across the life cycle of that product. Apart from Philip Crosby writing the book Quality is Free, he also had a follow-up book called Quality Without Tears, which is particularly charming. So one of the things that we have to do certainly in the regulated sector is we do a lot of validation. You know, we ensure that our systems are fit for intended use, fit for purpose. We ensure that our user requirement specs are clear on what do we mean by fit for intended use. And as you can see here, both of these goldfish bowls are fulfilling a purpose, one of them not so well as perhaps the other. But one of the definitions around things being fit for intended use is that it's good enough to do the job that it was designed to do. Now, that seems so simple, but we have a whole validation industry in terms of how do we test and demonstrate evidence that our systems, every batch, every day, are good enough to do the job that it was designed to do. And coming on from that is this lovely book, which is where I got my subtitle, When Good Enough is Not Enough. Like this little book, I picked it up in an airport. It's called The Difference. It's a very light read. And it's by this guy, Subir Chowdhury. And I really liked this, although in my initial stages of looking at this, I didn't quite understand what he meant here by a caring mindset, but he talks about, you know, we have to do things better than good enough. And that process and way of thinking begins with developing a caring mindset. I guess that caring mindset sounded a little bit airy-fairy to me in the early stages, but now that I've worked on, I really understand. I'll come back to this concept of, do you care about the quality of the work that you're producing? Do you care about, have you pride in the work that you're contributing to? And can you see how that affects the overall outcomes for the business and the clients or the patients? So for us, it's fairly clear. Just one of the findings of my own doctoral research was, you know, how fragmented our supply chains and our life cycles are, you know, over the past 20 years. From certainly when I started working in the industry, I started in Leo Laboratories up in Cashel Road, and we had everything from API on the site, that's the active pharmaceutical ingredient, onto fill finish. We had different dosage forms. We had a penicillin plant at that time as well, a diuretic synthesis plant. We had QA, QC, all on 11 acres in the middle of Dublin. But most businesses don't operate like that anymore. You know, you've got your drug substance happening in one country, and your drug product being filled in another, and perhaps packaging and labeling somewhere else. And you're dealing with critical partners on your critical supplies, or you may even have a CMO doing one or more of those stages, a contract manufacturing organization. So we have fragmented our supply chains so much that very often it's very difficult for people to see how they connect to the outcomes that matter to the business and the patient. And regularly when I go onto shop floors now, I'll say, you know, tell me about your patient. And, you know, you know, I can get anything that, oh, well, we don't have patients. We're a CMO. We only have a client and they have patients, but you're making the product. So yes, you do have patients, but nobody's bothered to introduce you to them. And what do our patients expect? I mean, they don't understand this fragmentation or complexity in our supply chains. All they want to be able to do is rock up to their, you know, pharmacy or their clinical practice and get high quality available medicines delivered on time in the correct dosage form at an affordable price. And they don't want to be told, oh, your medicine isn't available and we don't have an alternative generic in, to offer you. Now, that's all very well in an over-the-counter or even a prescription medicine for, a chronic illness like, blood pressure or a cardiac or, cholesterol lowering statins and things like that. But if you're an oncology patient and you're on a chemotherapy protocol, they can't swap it out halfway through. There isn't an opportunity for you if your dosage is not available. They can't put you on a different protocol just because this month that supply chain has broken down for whatever reasons that might be. Like I say, a quality problem, a batch gets rejected, you have a distribution problem, your cold chain has failed, whatever that might be. So we've got to be able to ensure that everybody throughout our supply chain maintains a clear line of sight to the patient always. And that comes back to every batch, every day. In thinking about that, we're going to talk about culture and behaviors and dialogue, and I'll come back and emphasize this point. But it really is, if we want to change the culture, we do that by focusing in on the behaviors. And how do we change behaviors? Behaviors are what we say and what we do, actions we take and the things that we say. So the only way we are going to change the behaviors is by having active dialogue, speaking to each other and being open and honest and transparent about the behaviors and the actions that contribute to success, and do more of those, and then be equally open and honest and not defensive about the behaviors and actions that contribute to failures, without any blame being attached to that, being able to surface those issues and then seeking to do less of those, reduce the likelihood of those occurring. So we need to be able to create spaces and processes that enable this dialogue. And we'll talk about how we put systematic processes into place where that dialogue, that knowledge transfer that we're doing today can occur to promote, coach and lead the behaviors that can deliver the decisions and the outcomes that matter to the business and the patient. And this is the kind of thing that, I regularly ask, as I say, whether I'm at a bench side in a lab or at the shop floor or in a warehouse or in a distribution center or in an R&D center or tech ops somewhere in global, who are your patients? And do the people who have the most input to the outcomes that matter, do they understand, what is the medical condition? They're always able to tell me the name of the drug and the dosage. It's this name and it's this pack size and it's this dosage form. But often we haven't gone to the trouble of communicating to them on a regular basis about who their patients are, what the medical condition is it a treatment for a chronic or an acute condition? What are the important characteristics of your patient cohort? Are they old? Are they young? What's their gender? Are they immunocompromised? Are there particular risks and challenges in the dosage form? Are you in a sterile dosage form versus an oral solid dosage or a topical dosage form that brings with it perhaps less risk? And more importantly, are we the sole supplier or one of a very few suppliers of this particular drug to the marketplace? So if we make a mistake, do we care? It comes back to, do we care about the quality of our work? Because if we don't get this batch out, there isn't an alternative out there. And particularly as we move to more personalized medicines, and they're certainly emerging, we're looking at arm-to-arm technologies with shelf lives of less than 48 hours. So it's not a case that, oh well, there's just we just go down to the warehouse and there's another batch waiting to go out there. We're moving away from those types of business models. So really, really important to make sure they know who their patient is. And by the way, that's all free to air material. You don't have to go out and generate any of that. It's all in your organization, but we don't share it with the people who need it. So another way that I like to look at, I'm the founder of the Quality Risk Management Institute as well. And my view of continuous improvement is very much about risk reduction and risk prevention. The reason we are looking at optimizing a process and the reason we are looking to continuously improve that process may well have, a business benefit in terms of increased yield or reduction of cycle times, all great. But we need to look at that in terms of risk prevention. So if we're looking at increasing the yield, is there any risk that we're going to, some of the steps that we're taking are going to undermine our ability to deliver our current yield into the marketplace? And of course, as soon as we go changing things, very often, we can end up with that whack-a-mole situation where we're fixing one problem and we're creating another problem over here. So I very much see these two disciplines as fully integrated, certainly within a pharma sector, and need to be. They're often not. They're still two different functions, and that at best can lead to duplication of effort, but at worst it can mean that we end up actually pulling in opposite directions. And as we're all no doubt fans of Deming, putting out fires is not an improvement of the process. So just one thing around this risk excellence concept, which is very much around this, continuous improvement, operational excellence concept, is we've defined a concept here where risk excellence is achieved when every person involved in creating value in their organization is also actively engaged in protecting that value. So wherever they are on the value stream, making them aware of their role within the value stream and what's upstream and downstream of them and what the overall outcomes are, but also helping to get their minds focused on surfacing those issues like near misses or problems or opportunities for improvement. Because like I say, if everyone is clear on their line of sight to the patient, then they're clear on where their role is in the value stream. And then they're also clear that our expectation is that their role is to protect that value as well. And they can do that by, preventing and reducing risks, making timely decisions, i.e., don't kick the can down the road when we know we have a problem. Why are we not, applying some level of urgency to solving these problems and prioritizing these problems? Because if we have 100 issues or 100 deviations or corrective and preventative CAPAs, as we call them in our industry, where we're correcting something and closing it out, just looking for an extension on that, and we know we have a problem, and very often we end up just kicking the cans down the road. We need to be clear, really clear about setting and achieving our objectives and making sure that they are really clear for everybody. So back to visual management, we'll come back to some of the tools around how we make that, and being relentlessly focused on always improving this performance. And that's why I see OPEX, or continuous improvement, and risk management as two sides of the one coin. And very often I go in and I find very robust OPEX programs within a regulated environment operating in complete isolation, maybe under a business excellence, and they're not looking at it from a risk perspective. And within a regulated environment, every improvement that you should be making should be able to demonstrate a measurable reduction in risk to quality, or risk to our ability to make sure our drugs are available on time, in full, every time. And so I often see, justifications for OPEX projects that are all around cost, and the return on investment is around cost. I appreciate that, that dollar value, but when we get something wrong and it impacts on the quality or our ability to release that batch, the costs become extrapolated way beyond the return on investment on some yellow belt or green belt project that was put in. So I really like to ensure that as well as putting down a dollar value, we're going to save this, or reduce the number of operators, or whatever it is, steps in the process. I really like for them to be able to quantify the amount of risk they are reducing, preventable errors, the likelihood of, we're reducing a manual step to an automated step, and therefore we're going to reduce the number of, over the last 12 months, here's the number of manual errors we had with this process, and that led to the following number of deviations and CAPAs that are investigations that had to be resolved. So really just a key thing for me is how they work together. And of course, within the sector, when I find continuous improvement or OPEX and risk management or quality systems working within their silos, our quality systems can very often drive us towards, oh, we have a deviation. Well, that's fine, because we have a system that manages deviations, and therefore we can go straight in and we can just log it into TrackWise or Viva or whatever our system is. And so long as the workflow will maintain our progress towards a solution. But that has a normalization of deviation, and we've seen that from Diane Vaughan's very interesting Challenger space shuttle disaster. Now, it took her 10 years to get to the bottom of that. But, that social normalization of deviance means that people within the organization can become so accustomed to deviation that they don't consider it deviation. It's the boiling the frog situation that we have. And despite the fact that they far exceed their own rules and elementary safety, people can continue on saying, well, okay, we've got a deviation, but we've got a corrective action around that. Now, that's all the way from 1996 from the Diane Vaughan report. But even more recently in 2019, I found a very nice quote from from Casey here around healthcare and pharma and regulated settings. So even in workplaces where carefully crafted policies, protocols and procedures, which pretty much defines where we work, there is often an unwritten understanding that the way things are done is not actually entirely aligned with the explicitly stated rules. And we all know that that happens. How many times have I seen, a cause code for a deviation? Somebody didn't follow the SOP. I regularly have to do, a redefinition for people about the difference between SOPs, standard operating procedures, and standard work, the benefits of applying standardization and standard work, because I've been over 30 years in the industry and I haven't yet met an SOP that I liked. They're usually loaded with tripwires and bear traps where we fall and fail. And again, that's a system process failure, not a human error failure, in my view. So this is just one little model, and I will stop talking about risk and we'll move on to some of the other more interesting things. But I just wanted to bring this little model. It's called the bow tie model of risk management. And it's just a way of getting your mindset, if you're working in a regulated sector, and if you are looking for continuous improvement opportunities, how you might just consider how these might be able to demonstrate a quantifiable reduction in risk to the process or the patient when you're looking at these opportunities. And I'm sure you're all very familiar with the Swiss model, James Reason Swiss cheese model of risk. But the reason I like this one is it puts the risk event right at the center of it. And everything to the left of that are the potential causes, errors that can arise, human errors, whatever it might be, contamination, mix-ups, all the things that can cause a problem to arise upstream of the event. And on the right-hand side are all the consequences of after the risk event has occurred. And they bring two very specific sets of language here, which often get, conflated in conversations that I'm having. The mitigating controls are all of the controls, those little triangles on the right-hand side of the event. They're already accepting that the risk event has occurred, and you are now trying to reduce the impact of the consequences on the business or the patient. That's, recalls, rework, and it could be, anything as far as not releasing the batch into the marketplace. But that's after the horse has bolted. They're the things you can do to reduce the impact of the error. But the ones that I really like to focus on are the preventative controls, and these are the opportunities for improvement, continuous improvement, that we should be able to look at, which either reduce the likelihood of occurrence of that risk event, so reducing down the number of times it may occur, or eliminating it entirely by putting in engineering or process design controls that can completely eliminate that risk event occurring in the first place. So our continuous improvement opportunities are really those little yellow rectangles there. And that's why we should be looking at, if we're looking at, somebody comes up with a continuous improvement idea within the regulated sector, I want to look at the data. Bring me through the data. Bring me through the last, 100 batches or the last 12 months of data. Have we had this problem pop up? In what ways? Not just on this batch, but maybe in other places in the organization. And therefore, what can I do? So that we really understand the problem that we're solving for, rather than sometimes we're solving symptoms. And certainly, if we're in the, thinking we're doing the risk controls around mitigating controls, we're managing symptoms. We're not managing root causes there. And this is why in a lot of the work that I do around continuous improvement is people always say to me, yeah, but we're so busy. We've got so many things going on. We've got so much correction. We've got so many change controls that we're doing. And I urge them to stop being a firefighter and facilitating this and become much more of a fire prevention officer. And these are the kind of reactive and proactive behaviors. Now, we tend, I'll put my hands up on this one as well. We can all be adrenaline junkies, running from one fire to the next and leaving the to-do list on the desk so that we don't have to deal with the fact that it's actually more appropriately labeled as a not done list. But the reactive behaviors that I often see is kind of accepting the status quo. This is the way we've always done things around here, or being defensive in accepting, criticism, constructive criticism as to why something might have went wrong, ignoring near miss events. The safety folks in our organizations don't ignore near miss. They use them as a teachable moment. They use them as an opportunity for learning. But within the quality space, we often treat them as a bullet that we've dodged. If an auditor or an inspector or as something has happened and we caught it just before it went out, or they didn't see it, we're like, phew, that we got away with that one. This kind of behavior can often lead frontline folks to be fearful about speaking up, hoping for the best rather than planning for the worst. And I regularly say as well, hope is not a strategy. Only raising concerns after the event, expecting someone else to take the action, covering up mistakes, or adopting a not my job mindset. And instead of what do we want to see? We want to see people being curious and asking why, not being told to park their intellect at the turnstile and effectively perform a frontal lobotomy. They may have masters and PhDs, and we're actually saying, no, everything is written in the SOP. So if you just do it as per the standard operating procedures, just come in and do exactly what it says on the tin, you'll be fine. But that's no good. We want people being curious and asking why. And we want them viewing near misses as an opportunity to improve. Raising concerns within their peer group and their leaders, maybe at their tier, their shift huddles, but they won't raise them unless there's a systematic element to your script around your tier, where it's saying, has anybody noticed anything unusual today? Has anybody got any concerns they want to raise? And making that part of the daily standard work. Again, offering suggestions for improvement, having something like a good catch system in place, but no point in having a good catch system if you don't have a process that can that is well lubricated, that can deal with those and adjudicate which ones we're going to work on first, and prioritize and set an expectation for teams that they're working on one or two active improvements at any one time from their ideas hopper that they have. Accountability, I'm going to come back to that in a little minute. And again, welcoming critical input as a means of learning, as opposed to being defensive. It's all about adopting that continuous improvement mindset. So how do we shift these behaviors and get to that speak up culture? Well, first of all, I want to say about a speak up culture, don't confuse talk with action, and don't confuse talk with speaking up, because very often I see tier meetings or shift huddle meetings that have a lot of talk in them, but it might as well be the parish pump or the water cooler or the coffee machine, because we're not talking about what matters. Or indeed we're in meetings and there's a lot of talk about what we need to do, and didn't we agree with this last week, and have we not done anything? So something has to get done and someone has to do it. And I love this little book, The Knowing Doing Gap, and I've used that quite regularly as well. So we need to ensure that employees are not afraid to speak up, to identify those issues, or challenge the status quo for improved quality and improved performance, and that they believe that management will act on their suggestions. Not only management, but that they will be empowered to act on those suggestions, and the means by which the number of suggestions that we're going to work on and which are the priority gets dealt with is, like I say, sponsored by management, and decision makers are there to make those decisions. Otherwise, you'll have a great influx of good catch ideas for the first month or two, and then people will be like, well, heard nothing back, so I won't be doing that again. So we want to get to that prevention rather than cure, where people, individuals feel comfortable with raising issues, and they build trust and create an environment where problem solving is part of the daily habits. Now, very briefly, I'm just going to introduce you to another fabulous man, Shane Craddock. He has a podcast and lovely books and lots of information on his website, but he gave us the permission within ISPE. I co-led and co-lead a cultural excellence work stream within ISPE, and Shane gave us the permission to use his mindset performance loop. And if we're focusing on wanting to improve performance and results, which is down at the end of this loop, he's really clear, and certainly from all of my work, I'm really clear, you can't just keep poking at the bottom of the loop here. You can't keep saying, well, we need better results and we're going to set new targets and we're going to set new performance expectations. That's all well and good if we don't get to the front end of the loop, because if the prevalent mindset, which dictates the kind of attitudes that we desire, but perhaps what we tolerate within our organizations, they drive the behaviors, and the behaviors are evident and tangible in the actions that we take or don't take. And that leads us to the results that we desire, or sometimes the results we deserve, and the performance that the outcome. So if we want to improve our performance and our results, we've got to make sure that we've got that attitude, behaviors, and actions aligned behind what our expectations are. Now, when I talk about culture change, people, glaze over. And if I ask 10 of you what you think culture is, you'd all give me a different answer. So it is, you can sense it. If you walk in, and I'm sure many of you have walked into organizations, and you can sense if it's not healthy, if it's a toxic culture. But the good news is that there is a concrete behavior, a concrete link between culture and behavior. And in the same way that culture drives behavior, here's the secret sauce. We're not actually going to try and change the culture. We're going to try and pinpoint the behaviors that matter, that contribute to success, and do more of them. And that in turn will drive that culture. And OC Tanner that regularly report out on organizational culture and surveys and that. And they talk about, companies that can keep up with rapid changes in the workforce will flourish, and companies that cannot will lose their best people. And I think, talent retention is one of the key reasons people come and speak to me now and saying, let's get you in here. We need to do something about maintaining and sustaining our talent, and not just losing all our knowledge and leaking it out, as people walk out the door. So what do we want with this desired culture of excellence? Well, we want all our people to become proactive problem solvers and perpetual learners, and then we can all go home and retire, basically. But it would not be just amazing if everyone in our organization was a proactive problem solver and perpetual learner. But that's what we're trying to get to. And, it has to become part of the DNA within our organizations, not just the solution to any given problem. And again, our quality systems
Stop.
very
The exit stop. Oh, sorry, excuse me.
Yeah. So one of the things that our quality systems often drive us towards is when we're logging in all of our deviations and our investigations, they go in and get a unique code, and we try and close them out, because the workflow is close each one within 30 days, or heaven forbid, whatever the number of days is, which is another bugbear of mine. But it doesn't lend us towards looking at them in clusters and doing affinity analysis and looking for where the common threads are around behaviors that behind those. Because if the same deviation hasn't happened in the same way and at the same time on a Tuesday with Bill, very often it doesn't get coded as a recurring deviation within our organizations. So the 6 dimensions of culture of excellence, this is from this report that we developed for ISPE and what now is in use in very many places. It's around, making sure you have the right active sponsorship in terms of leadership and vision, and I'll come back to that in a moment. Making sure we have those right attitudes and mindsets that are driving the right behaviors. Gemba is really a synonym for active employee engagement strategies, not just going out and doing the walk, but it's all the ways in which we get that dialogue and talk happening across our workforce and across the shifts and shift to shift. And then we have to have metrics that matter. My greatest desire when I walk into some organizations is to shred their metrics first, because they're driving all the wrong behaviors and they're lagging metrics, and they're looking at last quarter to try and drive next quarter's performance. And then, of course, oversight, reporting and action coming from those metrics that matter, those key behavioral indicators rather than key performance indicators, and the cultural enablers in terms of coaching and learning and development that we do. But it's really about these 3 disciplines here that comes from my own research of knowing, doing, being, provided structured learning on what we need to know, and that can be on the Lean Six Sigma tools, but practicing those new skills and competencies every day in the workflow. There's no point in learning about these things if we're not expected to bring them into our everyday work. And then the being part is delivering targeted performance based on those behavioral-based excellence strategies. So what are the things that we can do, around fostering this continuous improvement mindset? Well, we have to get to that point where organizations are, have that nagging feeling that things are never quite good enough, and that we have a process of building and uncovering pockets of good performance and spreading those constructive beliefs from the few to the many. So using our Lean Six Sigma toolbox, our OpEx toolbox, using structured problem solving, root cause analysis, making sure our tiered accountability, which I will show you towards the end, is really effective, and it's not just a talking shop. Using things like good catches and metrics that matter, designing metrics that matter, and best practice sharing. And then, again, it's really about fostering this mindset of learning, active learning. And we do that through dialogue. Teams, not individuals, are the fundamental learning units in our organizations. And dialogue represents that currency of learning for teams. So we have to ensure that we've got meaningful ways of feedback, feed forward, reflection into our learning cycles. And again, through our development programs, through our, collaboration and coaching, and through our recognition, which I'll cover a little bit on. So how do we do this in a real this culture of learning? So we target a new experience such as a Kaizen, or getting involved in a tier process, or going on a Gemba, or using some of the Lean Six Sigma tools with some of our folks, and then they actively identify and make visible a good catch through that. And they actively get involved in making those improvements. And then they measure the results, and they can see the benefit, even small benefits of what they have done. And that can help to embed engagement and ownership strategies where they're rewarded and recognized for coming up with a good idea, implementing the change, and making those small results. And that drives the new mindset and the belief that I can and should improve quality or compliance or performance and reduce risks. And they're much more inclined then to maybe put their hand up the next time to target the next opportunity, or maybe co-lead the next one or the next 5th one. And next thing you know, they're actually acting as a coach for some of their other peers. So it really is about making sure that we're learning by doing, and creating those opportunities for our teams to do that. And it does come back to this creating an attitude of gratitude. People will only do these things if they see that they are valued and they're recognized for it. And very often I see a lot of finger pointing going on around, oh, they don't take ownership, or they're not accountable for what they're doing. So I've ended up developing from my own work 3 clear definitions of when we say somebody is responsible for a task. That's usually their initials have been put down in a work schedule or project task sheet. What we want is for those individuals to be able to take ownership of that task. And that means being aware of all the potential problems that can go wrong, being vigilant for watchouts, and seeking timely assistance where necessary, not continuing to dig the hole if they or running into a problem, not continuing not to put their hand up and look for additional resources or help. But accountability, so that's that ownership is an individual attribute, but accountability is a team sport. And it comes from the peers around that individual. So if we see our colleagues or our teammates starting to falter or fall off pace or lose perspective with a task, it is our responsibility to hold them accountable in a supportive way of saying, I've noticed you haven't been making much progress. You've come to 2 meetings now and you said next week. What can we do? What did we think? What did we not identify early enough in terms of the scope of this task or the number of skills that you're going to need? And again, this comes back to this caring mindset that I spoke about at the beginning, and the inability to hold each other accountable for the tasks assigned underlines a lack of care about the quality of the work. And I know that most people do not come through the car park and the turnstile in the morning saying, I don't really care about how this goes today. I know they come in with a whole heart and wanting to do good. But our systems wear them down. So by the time they've released out of the turnstile and flicked back into their car at the end of the day, they're thinking, oh my God, I never want another day like that. So this lovely judging and
Nuala, it's Paul. I might do is maybe we're coming to nearly 10 at the moment. So maybe 2 more minutes and then we might go through a quick Q&A at the end if that suits.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks,
trying to keep on track. I'll read this one. It's really good about getting people to join the joining behaviors again, those proactive behaviors, as opposed to what happens when we don't have those, when we have reactive behaviors. And again, getting that gratitude in there and making sure that we're recognizing people, not just rewarding them through the normal reward structures that you have, but making sure that at the tier during a Gemba that they're called out, and that we start with anybody got any recognition that they want to say, yeah, Paul, great job, thank you very much. And the distinction in there between a recognition and a reward, and when you might use recognition and when a reward might be appropriate. So I'll leave those with you. Just to wrap then, I really want to bring you into this real world example of the 3 pillars of what does an engaged process look like that can improve the outcomes. So on the left here, we've got these organizational capabilities around the 6 dimensions of culture. And then the middle of our program is very, very structured, standard work, systematic processes around good catch, around reward and recognition, around the setup of your tier accountability, tier 1 to tier 5 over there on the right, around our continuous improvement and the use of the tools and the training and the development and the expectation, around our structured problem solving, around our Gemba programs and our proactive risk management program. So each of those is a series of standard works, best practices, with communities of practice who manage that, who share their knowledge across that. And like I say, we've got the resource center there. But the real engine behind this is the real-time proactive performance management, being able to set the expectations of what are we expected to do today, this week, this month, and what is your role in that. And we don't need chapter and verse on our visual management boards. We need to know by exception, are there any things that are going to impede us in getting our task done today on this shift or this week? Are there any things that are outstanding from last week that we need to follow up on? And having a really, really clear escalation process and communication of decisions and instructions coming back down. So the tier process is the driving force and the engine for this, where we track all our metrics that matter, and we're not looking at lagging metrics, we're looking at leading metrics of behaviors. And are we red or green? Are we winning or losing on those behaviors? Because we know they're the behaviors that are upstream of us getting our successful outcomes for the patient. And so finally, I would say, instead of having a fragmented approach to business excellence or operational excellence or risk management or quality management, we need to mobilize the entire workforce. It really is about switching on, turbo empowering your workforce so that we're transferring that right mindsets and best practices without any voltage loss as they spread. So it's spreading the excellence from the few to the many, but making sure everybody's involved, that engaging the front line to deliver on the bottom line. But it does also involve that top down as well, of making sure we have really active sponsorship from the top, not just paying lip service, not saying go on ahead and do it. You guys need to change. We're all good. It means they can't dial it in. They can't be sitting behind their Teams meetings. They need to get down onto the shop floor. They need to be doing the coaching, looking for problem solving, rewarding and recognizing as they go, doing their Gembas. So it's a top down, bottom up approach. So I'll leave it there. Yeah, looking forward to seeing if we have any questions that you'd like to ask.
So Nuala, a huge thank you on behalf of everybody on the call for the presentation. So again, I think for everyone on the call, we're talking about culture, behavior, etc. They get lumped in with each other. And again, absolutely, you've gone through it, very systematically in terms of bringing a greater understanding to everybody as well. So we have questions coming in. So Nuala, do you think direct interactions with the end customers would improve the connection between the people making and improving the products and the end user patients?
Yeah,
so direct interactions.
Absolutely. Yeah, that does help. And usually with a town hall or two in the year, they usually try and get patients or patient advocates in there. But if that's the only time that they're getting introduced to a patient, and they're mawkishly bringing in the bald, cancer patient once a year, that doesn't do it for me. There's lots of other ways we can connect to the patient. We can even read, heaven forbid, free to air materials like customer complaints that come in and often get routed to one department and we don't ever see them. And even if they're not associated with our piece of the supply chain or our piece of the value stream, just saying, could something like this happen here? Here's a cause, and have it as a lunch and learn session. So there's lots of ways we can communicate with the patients and make it real every batch, every day, without just doing the patient interactions, which are really valuable. I've done those, and they are, hearts and minds, people with tears. They can't believe, being thanked by someone to say, you've changed my life, the products that you make. That is inspirational. Definitely do it, but don't just do it once or twice a year. Find other ways of getting that hearts and minds, because otherwise we just all, it can seep into the groundwater and we can drift back to our old habits.
Great. So that's in terms of the chat on MS Teams. Any further questions or feedback for Nuala, please?
Go to leading metrics. Yeah, to replace lagging metrics. Yeah, for sure. Okay, so one of the lagging metrics that I'm particularly, Paul would probably be smiling now because if he hears me getting my soapbox out on this one, it's how many CAPAs did we close in 30 days? And tell me something that could be less useful in terms of, so we're already accepting that we're not excellent and we've had all these deviations and we've had to close corrective and preventative actions. I love to see a metric from our quality system of what's the ratio of PA, preventative actions, to CA, corrective actions, in our system. And I guarantee it'll be 90-10 or 80-20. So even setting a target around, let's start doing more prevention rather than cure, is a good way. But very often on those CAPAs, I love to see the golden hour philosophy brought in. So how many of our CAPAs or investigations did we open within the first 24 hours or 48 hours or whatever is an appropriate level, and get the rapid response team together of a multidisciplinary team? How many of those did we open within the first 24 hours? Not how many did we close on 30 days, because usually what that is, it's not a performance metric of the effectiveness of our quality system. It is it's an activity-based metric of how busy the quality folk were on the last Friday of the month signing off CAPAs. Some of those might not have been started until day 26, in which case the chance of you finding the root cause and putting in an appropriate, anything that's more than a band-aid is limited. But if we have a whole month to have a run at it, and even if we are going to look for an extension, we're not looking for an extension because we couldn't be bothered or we don't care about the quality of the work. We're looking for an extension because we've understood the complexity of the problem, and we are now seeing that we want to put a more detailed solution in place. And we're not being driven by 30 days. to drive the wrong behaviors. So that's another, just one example there of go-to leading metrics, but simple metrics on tiers. You know, how many Gembas got done this week, red and green, you know, how many people from the multidisciplinary team turned up at our tier meetings. If we think it's important for them to be there and to share their knowledge, you'd be surprised how three strikes and you're out, which means we're going to be talking to your leader. 3 red dots, you know, that engineering didn't turn up to our tier. It's amazing how that can start to realign behaviors. So those are leading behavioral indicators that can really help. Do I think that some KPIs drive the wrong behaviors? Yeah, absolutely. For sure, we drive the wrong behaviors. And even, you know, we don't count recurrence of deviations correctly. We count them in a way that suits us, because we don't really want to, you know, unearth the dirty nest of failure behind them. And we're not looking for, like I say, clustering and affinity of what is driving some of those failures. We take them, and I call that, like, we're trying to solve a swarm of locusts by catching one locust at a time through the quality management system, instead of actually looking at what are the environmental factors that cause swarming in the first instance. So yeah, I do a lot of work, and I've written a lot about how to derive. I devised a tool, and it's in that quality culture, cultural excellence guide, of how do you derive meaningful team-based KBIs, key behavioral indicators, from an organizational KPI, a key performance indicator, that is fine for reporting up, but doesn't mean anything to the team, you know, the individual teams. So you can derive local KBIs to deliver on that KPI, but it's meaningful for them, and they can see how they can move the needle. They can see their impact on it.
I think, Neil, as well, one of the key kind of indicators we would have worked on as well ourselves will be the number of, from a tier point of view, would be the number of near misses in itself, from a process point of view on that.
Yeah. And even, you remember, Paul, we had a lovely experiment over in the US, where we had the number of beads going into a little silicon tube down the side of the tier board, and the different color beads were all the reasons why schedule had changed. Now, people were getting beaten up and they weren't getting right the first time and all the rest, but the schedule was like a, you know, shoot a duck at a fairground moving target. You know, from when they came in on a Monday to what they were producing on Wednesday had changed. So, and that changes all of the workflows around there. So even tracking the different causes of why the schedule had changed, and trying to go back and say, well, which are the ones that we need to knock this out? This amount of variation in our system is killing us. How can we do standard work if every day we're supposed to be nimble on our feet, tap dancing around the schedule, you know? So we have to try and set up our systems so that we're facilitating our employees to do their best work every day, instead of actually creating bottlenecks and barriers for them to do their best work every day.
Brilliant. We have about a minute left, so we might take one more.
Last minute.
Great.
Yeah.
Last minute.
Thanks a million for a pretty full hour. A lot of references that you shared there. So as we said, that'll be available next week. I think culture is going to be an ongoing discussion. I love the whole concept about lagging indicators, you know, KPIs, and really trying to get to something that's going to be more predictable. Fantastic. So I'm going to wrap it up, because I know we do try to keep to the hour. Nuala, thanks a million. I do hope you'll keep in touch with the network, and we might have to go and revisit this again at some later stage. As I said to everybody, we'll have another one at the end of next month, May, currently being planned at the moment. We've got 2 visits in April. Let us know if you want to go on those. Brian is welcoming with open arms into the An Post Distribution Centre in the middle of April. Admin shed is full, so we may have to do another one on that. And yeah, thanks a million for your attendance today.
And one thing I will, I mean, sorry, Steve, the slides will be shared, but I'll also get Paul to share out. We do a Risk Revolution podcast, and we talk about